of it, equilibrium and the adjustment process. Ordinarily, we won't be doing much review in this class, since you can always go back and rewatch a video. But in this case, I want to emphasize a few points, and the material is very important. So let's review, but we'll do so quickly. Okay, here's the equilibrium price. The price where the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. Why is that the equilibrium price? Because at any other price, forces are put into play which push the price towards the equilibrium price. So at a price of $80 per barrel, for example, we would have a surplus. The quantity supplied would be greater than the quantity demanded. Sellers have more goods than they have customers, and because of that, they have incentives to push the price down towards the equilibrium price. What if the price is less than the equilibrium price? Well, in this case, the quantity demanded will exceed the quantity supplied. Buyers will want the good, but there won't be enough of the good to go around. In other words, there'll be a shortage because the buyers have to compete to obtain the good. They're going to push the price up, again, towards the equilibrium price. The equilibrium price is the only stable price. Through a similar kind of argument, we can show why this quantity, the quantity such that quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, why this quantity is the equilibrium quantity. Namely, choose any other quantity, and let's show that that can't be an equilibrium. So suppose that the quantity bought and sold was 50 million barrels of oil per day. Notice that for this last barrel of oil which is being bought and sold, buyers are willing to pay up to $90 for that barrel of oil, or for one more barrel of oil, they're willing to pay $90. On the other hand, sellers are willing to sell that barrel of oil or one more barrel of oil for just $50. So there's a big potential gain from trade here of $40. Indeed, for any quantity below the equilibrium quantity, there are unexploited gains from trade. Now, in economics, we assume that if you put a potential gain from trade in front of people, they're going to find it. They're going to be able to realize that if only they bought and sold a little bit more, both the buyers and the sellers could be better off. So that's why we assume that the quantity bought and sold will be pushed to the equilibrium quantity, because it's only at the equilibrium quantity that all the gains from trade have been exploited. Okay, in a free market, could the quantity bought and sold be greater than the equilibrium quantity? Well, not for any significant period of time. Imagine, for example, that 90 million barrels of oil were being bought and sold. Well, for this last barrel of oil, the suppliers are willing to sell that barrel of oil for $90. That's their cost. They require at least $90 to stay in business and sell that barrel of oil. On the other hand, buyers are willing to pay for that barrel of oil only $50. So there's a lot of waste going on here. Suppliers are spending more to produce the barrel than the barrel is worth to buyers. Indeed, at any quantity above the equilibrium quantity, there's waste. And we don't expect waste to last very long in this market, precisely because without any intervention, suppliers are not going to be able to sell a product to buyers for more than the buyers are willing to pay for that product, for more than the product is worth to the buyers. So for this reason, we don't expect waste to last in a free market either. So a free market maximizes the gains from trade. Remember also that the gains from trade can be broken down into two parts: the consumer surplus and, of course, the...
We'll stop here because we haven't covered producer and consumer surplus yet. That will be a later chapter. But that was another review on what we went over last class about how equilibrium works and how the invisible hand of the market moves us towards equilibrium. I'll do another example real quick of how equilibrium, how this process works with the market for fixed price events. So this weekend, I'm going down to DC and I'm going to an XFL game. That's not a joke, I really am. I want to see what it's like. So now, obviously, that's going to have, it's a normal market, so it'll have your downward sloping demand curve. But our supply curve is going to be a little different here. Anyone guess why that is? Why the tickets in the stadium would be, why the supply curve would be different?
They're just unsure of how much they're actually going to need.
Not exactly. There's a limited amount to sell. There's only so many seats in the stadium, and you can't change that in the short term. We'll ignore like that they could sell some stadium-only seats in some stadiums. So here's our supply. Now, then you guys go to concerts or go to sporting events where you have to buy it off StubHub, your tickets, instead of going straight there. And notice the price on your ticket is a lot cheaper than what you get from like the secondhand market. The reason they do that, or why this happens, is because the stadium will set a price here. When they set the price here lower than equilibrium, which they tend to do, so lower than equilibrium, the quantity demanded is going to be over here, yet you can only supply this many tickets. There's never going to be, there's not a way to offer more tickets than that. So when the price is set too low, if we can't ration based on price, how do we end up rationing ticket sales?
Like first come, first served?
Normally it's first come, first served. So as soon as the tickets go live, people go on and they refresh the website on the computer until it comes up and they can get in and buy the tickets. So there's a bunch of people out there who value the tickets more than this price. So what we see is people going online, they take them to StubHub. Like I gave the example of my buddy, almost bought tickets off of Craigslist. That's probably not the best move. But they know they can sell a ticket for more than what they bought it for. So they sell to those people, pushing up the price until the appropriate quantity is sold. So it seems like in these situations where people are selling price of tickets too high, they're taking advantage of people that really want it. But in reality, this occurs because it turns out the price is being set too low initially. And once they all sell out, there's no way for the venue or for the franchise, for the sporting event, to be able to ration the tickets, to increase the price at that point. So we see the price moving towards equilibrium on the secondary market. But it's the same basic process as the typical market that we just showed in the video. That there's unrealized gains from trade, and they push it up. The price pushes up as more people that bid it, or people that value it more, bid up the price. Okay. We did increase in supply last class, right? A shift in the supply curve. Okay. So we'll look at the converse, a decrease in the supply curve. I'll change that as a shift to the left, I'm sorry. Can anyone think of an example of what would cause the supply curve to shift to the left? What would reduce supply?
Anything with agriculture didn't have like a drought period, because they won't be able to yield as much as well.
Yeah, an act of God, so a drought, I don't know, locusts, or some, like a new pest.
Or pesticides.
Yeah, new pesticide with bad side effects. Any other examples you guys can think of?
Run out of resources, like you could run out of gasoline.
Yeah, running out, or even just the price increasing. So like the oil embargo in the 70s, a lot of OPEC countries wouldn't export to the West. By increasing the cost of inputs, firms were forced to reduce the supply of goods. So what happens when the supply curve shifts to the left? You see a decrease in supply. The curve moves over here. The price increases from price 1 to price 2. And the quantity of goods demanded falls from Q1 to Q2. Again, as the price increases, fewer people are going to be willing and able to buy those goods. So, thinking back to last class, which do you think is preferable, supply increase or demand increase? I'm sorry, a supply increase or a supply decrease?
Depends for the consumer, you know, like, if you're a consumer, you don't want the supply to decrease, then the price is gonna go up, but if it's selling, then the supply decrease, profits gonna go up.
Yeah, so definitely consumers are gonna like a supply increase. Producers could go either way, depending on what quantity is going to maximize their profit. Next chapter, we'll get into determining how sensitive the producers are to price. So we'll know if their profit is going to increase or decrease based on supply curve shifting to the left. All right, so going back to the paper market, suppose that incomes increase. In this case, because it's an intermediate good, let's say the firms that are buying the paper, their profits are increasing. So what's going to happen in the paper market? Because it's a normal good, so as people's incomes increase, the demand increases. When incomes rise, the demand curve is going to shift to the right. The demand curve is going to move from here out to here. What we end up seeing is the price increasing, and then the quantity demanded also increasing. Because the supply curve does not move, we're just moving along the supply curve from one point to another. So the price is going to have to necessarily increase as the cost of producing those goods is going to increase. But there's still more people that are going to demand those goods because they have a higher income. If you stay at this original price and just moved out to the new demand curve, you're going to see a shortage. There's going to be consumers are going to demand more than producers are willing and able to bring to the market. So that's going to force the price up in order to conserve the goods so that the people who value them the most highly are going to be able to purchase them. Now, suppose the use of digital technology increases. People are using computers more instead of like writing each other letters. So they don't need as much paper. But what's going to happen in this case of the equilibrium in the paper market? We're going to see the demand curve decrease. Firms need less paper. So it's going to move out here from D2 to D1, back in. So we're going to see the price fall and the quantity demanded fall. At the original price, if we stayed here at P1 and just moved it onto this demand curve, we're going to see a surplus at the original price. Because consumers don't value the paper as much, they're going to be less willing to purchase it. So there's going to be leftover paper on the market. That's going to force the price down as producers are forced to sell at a lower price just to get them off the shelves. What it's going to end up doing is decreasing the quantity demanded from Q1 to Q2. So this is a little table to summarize what's going to happen to the demand curve. I think it's a lot easier to look at the supply and demand graph to remember, but if you remember better this way, it's both in your textbook and in the slides. So obviously, if the supply and the demand curve both stay the same, the price and quantity aren't going to change. There's nothing going on. If the demand curve shifts to the right and the supply curve is unchanged, the quantity is going to increase, the price is going to increase. And your demand curve shifts to the left, demand curve demand decreases, you're going to have the quantity demanded decrease and the price decrease. Likewise, your supply curve shifts to the right, demand curve doesn't change, quantity is going to increase and the price is going to decrease. Supply curve shifts to the left, supply decreases, the quantity demanded is going to decrease and the price is going to increase. You can also have supply and demand curves moving at the same time, but when that happens, you can't, without looking at the magnitude of the shifts in the curve, just say what's going to happen. So it's dependent on the situation and how we draw them. So let's do an example. So the price of Blu-ray players from 2006 to 2013 fell from $800 to $95. That was a pretty significant drop. And the number of Blu-ray players that people bought increased substantially. So which of these four options do you guys think best explains what's going on there? You think it was supply or demand that caused it? And then you think it was an increase or a decrease? Decrease in demand? Any other ideas?
I would say increase in supply.
Increase in supply? Any other guesses or suggestions? Okay. So what we saw was an increase in the supply. Initially, it was very expensive to make Blu-ray players. Technology was difficult, and there weren't a lot of companies making Blu-ray players. And initially, someone invents a new product. It's normally just like one company that sells it at first, until more and more firms either copy them or develop the ability to create something similar enough. Over time, the supply dramatically increases. More companies begin selling them. They find more efficient ways to produce it, more cost-effective ways. They stop using resources to make DVD players, and they use them to make Blu-ray players. So supply is going to increase. In this case, it increases substantially. And that's why we see such a large drop in the price, while the quantity demanded is increasing. This is pretty good for consumers, isn't it? This is about the best case scenario when you get an increase in supply, because it drives down the price while simultaneously increasing the quantity. So people are able to buy a lot more of whatever good we're talking about when there's an increase in supply, and they get to do so at a lower price. If we would have increased the demand curve instead, increasing demand is also good because it's the same result. People are able to buy more. What we see is when it moves out from here to here, the quantity demanded increases from Q star to Q prime. But we also see the price increase. From P star to P prime. So even though people are able to buy more, it's still costing them more to buy those additional products. So in the long run, standard of living is being improved by an increase in supply, not by an increase in demand. Okay, so question for you guys. What do you think is going to be worth more? An original letter written by John Wilkes Booth or an original letter written by Abe Lincoln?
John Wilkes Booth.
John Wilkes Booth? What's that? Oh, John Wilkes Booth was the man who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, a great president and statesman. John Wilkes Booth, unknown failed actor who killed him. Any other guesses?
John.
What's that?
John.
You think John Wilkes Booth? For you two, any reasons why? Or just guesses?
I'm saying because Abraham Lincoln was president for many years and he was well liked at the time, so a lot of his stuff was kept well within John Wilkes Booth, and then Jackson and his stuff probably wasn't saved well. And now that it's been time ago, it's an historical item, so it's worth more now because time has passed.
Should have had you teach this part. Yeah, so that's basically what happened. Last year, there's an auction where they had one of Booth's letters and one of Lincoln's letters, and Booth's went for a higher price. Lincoln has a high demand, but he also has a high supply. So he was president, he wrote a ton to different people, and a lot of people saved it, because even at the time, like if the president writes you a letter, you're gonna keep it. For Booth, didn't write that many letters, and a lot of people didn't save him because he was just some failed actor until after the assassination. So what we see here is even though there's a lower supply and demand here, because they cross this point here, they end up with a higher price than Lincoln, whose supply curve is way out here and demand curve is way out there. So even though it may seem at first glance, although not to you guys who answered, counterintuitive that Lincoln's letters would go for less, because of the way supply and demand curves interact, turns out that they're going for less than John Wilkes Booth. Okay. Yeah, we'll watch another quick video about equilibrium. These are good good things to study from instead of sitting down and listening to a whole like hour and 10-minute class. You want to go over a concept, like you want to go over equilibrium quickly, to go and get like a 5-10 minute video, go through and get the information. So this is Vernon Smith. He's a Nobel laureate in economics. Back in like the 60s, he did experiments on whether equilibrium, whether it could happen in real life, or whether it was just something we imagined going on using theory. So he literally did experiments with people, giving them, he would say like how much their cost was for like producers and how much they valued the good if they were consumers. So he would like take a room like this, just split it in half and let people sort it out. And what he found was like through like them bidding back and forth is they actually moved the price towards equilibrium.
Now that we understand supply and demand and the equilibrium process, we can ask, does the model work? Some of the most impressive evidence was developed in 1956 by Vernon Smith, one of the founders of experimental economics. Smith actually expected that his lab experiments, which I'll describe in more detail shortly, he expected that they would disprove the model. But he was shocked when time and time again the model predicted exactly what happened. Vernon Smith was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. Let's take a look at what he did. Smith's first experiments were very simple. He gave a group of students, called the buyers, cards similar to these, which told them the value that they placed on a good, the maximum they would be willing to pay for the good. He then did the same thing for sellers, giving them cards which told them their costs, the minimum price at which they would be willing to sell the good. Notice that the distribution of buyer values determines the demand curve. At a price of $3.50, for example, the quantity demanded would be 1. But as the price falls, so let's say just below $3, the quantity demanded would increase to 2. Similarly, the distribution of cards for the supplier costs determines the supply curve. Moreover, because Smith knew the values that he distributed, he could calculate the demand and the supply curves and the predicted equilibrium prices and quantity. Smith let the students make trades in a double oral auction. Traders would call out, "I'll sell for $2, I'll buy for $1, and so forth. Anytime two traders agreed to a deal, the price would be called out. Sale at a price of $1.50. If a buyer and a seller, say this buyer and this seller, agreed to make a trade at, let's say, a price of $1, then the seller would earn the price minus their cost. In this case, the seller would earn a profit of 25 cents. The price minus their cost. Similarly, the buyer would earn their value, $2.25 in this case, minus the price, $1, for a profit of $1.25. Now here was another key to Smith's market. He actually paid the traders their profits in real money. So Smith's experimental market was a real market, with a real demand curve, a real supply curve, and traders who had an incentive to maximize the gains from trade. So what happened? Here are the results from one of Smith's remarkable experiments. The demand and supply curve calculated by Smith are shown here on the left. The model predicts an equilibrium price of $2 and an equilibrium quantity of 5 or 6 units. What actually happened is shown on the right. The actual market price quickly went to $2, or very close to it. The market quantity quickly went to 5 or 6 units. Moreover, exactly as predicted by the model, the buyers with the highest values bought, and the sellers with the lowest costs sold. In short, almost all the gains from trade were exploited, leading to near maximum efficiency, exactly as predicted by the model. Another way to test the model is to examine its predictions about what happens when the demand or supply curves shift. In fact, what makes the demand and supply curve model so powerful is that you can analyze any change in market conditions using a shift in either the demand or a shift in the supply curve. That will produce a prediction about what will happen. You should be very familiar with demand and supply curve shifts. Let's run through a few examples. The key here is to understand the logic, not to try to memorize the results of every possible shift. If you understand the logic, then with a few curves, you'll always be able to duplicate and to understand exactly what the model predicts. Here's the market for laptops, with the demand and the supply of laptops. We all know that technology has reduced the cost of computer chips, Moore's law and all that. The reduction in the price of computer chips reduces the cost of producing laptops. A reduction in costs is modeled by an increase in supply. The supply curve moves to the right and down. So what does the model predict? The model predicts, therefore, that the price of laptops will fall and the quantity bought and sold will increase. Pretty good prediction. Now let's look at the market for portable generators. Let's suppose that a hurricane is approaching. What will the approaching hurricane do to the demand for generators? Well, it will increase the demand, shifting the demand curve up and to the right. What does the model predict? The model predicts an increased price of generators and a greater quantity exchanged. Also, pretty good prediction. Using the simple but powerful model of supply and demand, you can also understand important events in world history. Let's look at the price of oil over the last 50 or 60 years. Here's the price of oil since 1960. You can see a few key events. In 1973, for example, OPEC first flexed its power by reducing the supply of oil in an embargo. And what you can see is that the price of oil skyrocketed. The big price increase makes sense because there aren't many good substitutes for oil in the short run. We're going to be talking more about the elasticity of demand in future videos. The Iranian Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War were also important supply shocks, negative supply shocks, which pushed up the price of oil. A higher price, however, encouraged more exploration. And as additional sources of oil were discovered in the North Sea and in Mexico, the price of oil began to fall. Another key event occurred in the 2000s, as growth in China and India increased. That increased the demand for oil, pushing up the price. For the first time, millions of people were able to afford a car, and that increased the demand for oil. You can see that increased demand continued until this big drop in the price of oil in 2008, 2009. What's that? That, of course, is the demand shock from the big recession and the financial crisis, which hit the United States and Europe especially hard, reducing the demand for oil, at least until the recovery has started to occur. What you can see here is that the simple supply and demand model provides a very useful framework for understanding our world. Thanks.
If you want to test yourself, click.
So when I was an undergrad, I actually did the Vernon Smith experiment. I was a producer and I had a super high cost. I was way up on the supply curve. So it really sucked for me because no one would buy my product. So I just kind of walked around aimlessly. That wasn't too fun. I don't know if you could tell from the picture, but Vernon Smith was wearing a weird shirt. When he presents at conferences or does any public speaking engagements, he doesn't dress up. He just wears a Hawaiian shirt. He came to one talk, or I went to one of his talks that was really important, and he wore a bolo tie. You know, the little round, it's round metal, and then 2 shoestrings hang down. It's like the Texas tie. That's what he wore to dress up. Okay, so over time, both supply and demand are going to change, and because so much new knowledge is being discovered, consumers' tastes and preferences change, our income changes over time, the number of new entrants increases or maybe decreases. There's a whole lot of things going on in the economy, so supply and demand are both going to shift in the long run. So going back to their smartwatch example from the textbook, as new firms enter the market for smartwatches and incomes increase, we're going to see demand increase and supply increase. Supply because there's new producers now providing smartwatches, demand because people have more money to spend on smartwatches. So here we see the supply shifting to the right and demand shifting to the right. Now, we don't know initially, just saying that both these curves are shifting, what the effect of the change is going to be, because they're pushing in different directions. In this case, demand increases more than supply, so the price is going to increase while the quantity demanded increases. So the change, or the effect of the shift in the demand curve is going to be greater than the effect of the shift in the supply curve. But we can imagine the opposite scenario, where supply increases more than demand. Right? Yeah, that's the next slide. So in this case, we see the price actually fall while the quantity demanded increases. So depending on how much the supply curve shifts and how much the demand curve shifts, depends in this situation, affects whether the price is going to increase or decrease. So if we don't know the shifts in the supply and demand curve, then it's difficult for us or impossible for us to try to predict. I mean, you can imagine a situation where supply and demand curve shift by the same exact amount, so the price stays exactly the same while the quantity demanded increases. It's not very common, but it's obviously possible. So going back to, say, 1700, which do you think has increased more, the supply or the demand curve?
Probably those, but demand more because we have a bigger population, so you have a bigger amount of people to sell to.
Okay.
You have a bigger amount of people that want to buy stuff.
Yeah, 6 trillion more people or something crazy like that. It's a lot bigger market. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say demand not just because of population, but how many markets you can reach.
So you're no longer just selling to the people in your village, like you were in 1700, you're now selling across the world. Anyone else? think of what's happened to prices since 1700. Do you think prices have, real prices, do you think they've increased or decreased? Obviously, we've had inflation that like pushes them up, but is it easier to purchase goods now? Or is it relatively more expensive, more difficult to purchase goods now? Obviously, quantity has increased dramatically.
I think it's easier for us now as consumers. If you go to the grocery store and get bananas, you want to like they're available, and get most other stuff that you can go to Amazon. So there's definitely like demand, but there's also been supply of.
So more supply? That's right. So since 1700, economists estimate that the living standards have increased by 3,000%, which is nuts, like as a number to imagine. We had seen a large increase in demand because people's incomes are now much higher. There's now a lot more people, and markets are a lot more integrated. So you're not just selling to people, to your next door neighbors, you're selling to like anyone in the world. Despite that, we've seen supply increase much, much more. It's now a lot easier to produce goods, a lot cheaper to produce goods, because we've had innovation and entrepreneurship. Economists can't agree, they can't figure out what's caused the great enrichment. Basically, if you look at per capita GDP, and people have gone back and estimated it to like 2000 BC, relying on, I don't know, stuff from like ancient civilizations, like the ruins they find, GDP was flat and about zero the whole time. And there's a slight dip there during slight dip during the Black Plague in Europe. And then about 1700, shoots up like that. So we try to figure out what the hell happened, what's going on, why was the world like this? Anytime there was an increase in like income in a region, anytime they got a little bit better off, they would just have a few more babies, and then that would swamp all the gains, and the per capita income would go back to about $3 a day. But now it's shot up substantially. What's going on? A few economists say it's literally just innovation and entrepreneurship. Once civilizations or societies began rewarding them and encouraging them, looking up to them, that's when people were encouraged to invent, to come up with these new ideas, to sell them to people, and that's what caused this massive increase in supply. It drove down the relative costs of buying goods and provided us with a lot more goods than we had in the past. There's a quote I really like, that the beauty in the Industrial Revolution was not making a queen a million silk stockings, it was providing silk stockings that a million stock girls could afford. It was the idea of driving down the price and massively increasing the supply, allowing everyone to get these products that only a few people could get in the past. There's a link here to an article from humanprogress.org. You really can't see that. So let's look, I'll just show this. This is how much more you can buy of each of these goods over the past like 100 years. So right here at the bottom is eggs, a dozen eggs. With the median income, you can now buy 38 times the amount of eggs you could for the same amount of money 100 years ago. Next one is sugar. The median income can get 28 times the amount of sugar for the same exact price as before, because things have become so much relatively cheaper. And the prices are quantified as hours of work. So for 1 hour of work, you can now get 38 times more eggs. There's a chart down here that shows exactly. So for an orange, it used to take an hour and 15 minutes of work to be able to buy a dozen oranges. Now it takes 0.3 hours. Then that's too hard to do in my head right now. It'll take substantially less time to be able to buy those oranges, less time of work. So it shows how much real incomes have increased over that time. All right, so let's take a break real quick. Let's do a question from each side of the room. I'll start with you guys as usual because there's more of you.
Is our exam Tuesday?
It's going to be Thursday. So Tuesday we'll go over a little bit of price elasticity of supply and demand. And then like the second half of the class, I'll review whatever we've gotten up to. And then Thursday is the exam. The exam will be 25 questions, or 25 multiple choice questions, and then 5 short answer questions. And then like 1 or 2 extra credit questions. Extra credit will be a little hard, but the rest of the tests shouldn't be difficult for you guys. And you may hate like the fact that you have to deal with the short answer, but that's like I can't give partial credit on multiple choice questions. I can always give partial credit on short answers. So as long as you put something down that's like relatively related, you can at least get some points. So please, please, for the love of God, put something down on short answers if you don't know what you're talking about. How do kids not answer last time I taught this class? You're like, I can't even give you like 1 point or 2 points for this.
How many points is that?
It's out of 100 points. So what? Like 10 points apiece for short answer and then 2 for multiple choice.
How many short answers?
5 short answer for 10 points. Yeah. Another question that's not about the exam from anyone.
What are you expecting out of the NFL?
I haven't looked over their rules to see how different it is from the NFL. I know.
Pretty sure you're allowed body slurs.
Are you?
What are you going for?
Why am I going?
Yeah.
It's the opening weekend for the team in DC, and I'm like going down to see some friends. So they wanted to go see it, so I'm excited to see if it's good or not. I have no idea.
You guys will be good.
I hope it's not going to be like the what was the last league, the AFL? Yeah. Hopefully it's not like that. And it's actually decent football to watch. At the very least, it should be fun in the stadium. And I just saw that they're going to the announcers are going to talk about like the spreads and like all the betting stuff when you watch it on TV. So I'm like the NFL like discourages like even thinking about that. They're going to be like pro gambling.
It's Vince McMahon. It's somebody.
Yeah, there's going to be some self-promotion as long as they have fun. Like the NFL just started allowing celebrations again.
Is it like arena? I forget. Is it going to be like close quarters? 'Cause I know there's.
It's outdoors.
So it's not like. Because I know there's this one thing that used to be on Spike, and it was for like kind of like an extreme football thing. I don't remember. It was like 10 years ago.
Was like the old school arena football, or was
I
it?
think so. Yeah, something like that.
That was fun. It wasn't like great, like high quality football, but it was just like people like running around. I loved how like the players could go in motion and be sprinting towards the line of scrimmage before the snap, as long as they didn't go off sides. So you'd have like slot receivers just like running around the back and then firing off. So it was like so hard to stop them. And games would be like 70 to like 65. I don't know. I remember the old XFL I was like a kid when it came out. The one dude who like played for the Panthers had the "He Hate Me" on the back of his jersey. Like they could put like nicknames and stuff on there. I hope they do stuff like that again. So people like originally liked the XFL, but like they was screwed up with like the TV deals. They ended up losing money on that. And you guys see the 30 for 30 on it? Oh, that was really interesting. What's that?
The old rule people would just get hurt everywhere. They try to make it more exciting, but like instead of having a coin toss, to see who got the ball first, they would just sprint the ball and like dive for it. So like 90% of the games would start with an injury.
Yeah,
That didn't help.
that's the hard thing with football, is because you're like destroying each other. So you've got to think of ways that aren't going to kill the game because of injury, but are also fun to watch. But they're basically like eliminating kickers, which is funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll step away from the theoretical world and go into more of a real world, concrete example of how equilibrium and shifts in supply and demand curve affect people. So we'll look at occupational licensing because that's the research area I tend to focus on. So occupational licensing is like a permission slip from the government in order for someone to be able to work in an occupation. So the government sets these requirements for like fees, for education, for training. They have exams you have to pass, and other stuff like good moral character that you have to demonstrate and you have to pass before you're able to work in the field. It's ubiquitous in like the healthcare industry and a lot of other services, not so much in business. Are there any accountants in here? Accounting majors? Looking to get your CPA? Okay. That's about the closest thing to licensing you really have in the business world. Now these are passed at the state level, these laws. So every state has slightly different requirements. And you even see occupations that are licensed in some states not being licensed in other states. So Alexis, do you have any good examples of the weird ones?
Sorry.
Examples of weird occupations that are licensed in just a couple states?
Milk dealers, consultants,
Horse masseuses are licensed in what, one state or two states?
I think
Three? Are egg handlers still licensed in those two states? Literally, like those of you that don't like live on a farm, you hold up the egg and have a light behind it and see if the egg's like good or not. Polygraph.
Yeah.
Now, if you administer like the lie detector test, in some states that person has to be licensed. I don't know if it's states, but some cities license fortune tellers. But yeah, so there's many occupations. We typically think of doctors, lawyers, basically anyone in healthcare, dentists, as being licensed. But it extends far beyond that to a lot of lower income occupations. Lower skill level, and things that don't cause harm. So the basic idea of licensing is to prevent low-skilled professionals from entering an occupation. These are people that would hurt consumers by doing a poor job. You can imagine a bad doctor messing up, screwing up somebody's life. Hard to imagine that from a horse masseuse. So it protects consumers from harm and also reduces information asymmetry. The idea is that this person has a credential that they can show you so they can prove that they are skilled in occupation. They're skilled at providing that service to you. So the idea is that more people will be willing to buy a service from an individual if they know that they're going to get a good service. They reduce the worry so people are more confident in what they're going to get, which helps the market function more efficiently. Reducing information asymmetry, always a good thing. Instead of having to discover, we talked about the market as a discovery process, instead of having to discover by literally buying their service if that person is good or not, by seeing the license that should demonstrate, in theory, to the consumer that that professional is going to do a good job. So it helps the market function more efficiently, in theory. Now there's three main types of occupational regulation. There's licensing, which is the most strict, which is you literally cannot do this job unless you have your license. Then there's certification, which is a little bit less in depth, where if you call yourself a CPA, you need to have that certification, to pass those exams, to pay those fees. But you can still be an accountant and do accounting stuff without getting your CPA. You just can't say, I am a CPA. And finally, there's registration, which is like the easiest. You just send your information to the government. So I guess in this case, like usually the state government. Say like, this is my name, this is the business, how I offer the services. this is how you contact me. And then you have to usually like buy some sort of insurance so that if you mess up and hurt someone, like cause them harm from doing a bad job, that covers the harm you cause. Licensing has been growing substantially since the 1950s. This is a graph showing union membership and occupational licensing. Union membership back in the 50s was almost 35%. It was a big labor market institution. Now, less than 15% of the workforce is a member of a union. People, I'll say, that are pro-union usually are upset by this. They say this is a real negative trend. We see a lot fewer people belonging to unions, but we also see a lot fewer people working in manufacturing, where we tend to see unions. You don't see a lot of unions in services or professions. What you do see is occupational licensing, which has grown substantially from 5% up to nearly 30% of workers now. So there are side effects of occupational licensing. There's some good things in theory. It improves the quality. It prevents low quality from harming consumers. It reduces information asymmetry to allow the market to function more efficiently. But there's also side effects. It limits competition because there's fewer people practicing in the field. It raises the professional's wages, which is good if you're one of those professionals, but it's bad if you're the person paying their salary, or paying them for the services that pays their salary. It reduces movement between states because if they're passed on the state level, you go from one state to another state, you have to reapply for a license. So it's an expensive and annoying process. It makes people less likely to move. And it slows innovation. This is partially because of the fact that you're reducing supply, so you're limiting the competition. People don't have to do better to get more consumers away from one of their competitors. They're not going to. Additionally, when you have laws and regulations spelling out exactly what you can do, and when you all have the same exact training, or very similar training, it makes people think, the same way. So it reduces the ability to think differently and try to solve problems a different way. So looking at a market for whatever, let's say legal services, because they're licensed. What licensing is going to do is going to decrease the supply, shift the supply curve to the left. So we end up with fewer legal services being offered. So we're moving from this equilibrium, the initial equilibrium point, Q star there, to Q prime here. So fewer legal services being demanded, while at the same time, we go up here to a higher price. So moving from P to P prime. So now consumers are paying more for services, and there's fewer services being consumed by customers. Now there's also a question, what if demand increases due to more consumer confidence? Now you can trust the professional you're going to. The lawyer is going to abide by a certain minimum level of law and of quality. There's going to be a certain quality. So maybe you're more likely to buy the purchase. So we still see the supply curve shifting to the left, but in this case we see the demand curve shift out. More people are entering the market. It's not like my buddy buying those tickets off of Craigslist, where you don't know if you can trust the other person. This is like buying it from StubHub or directly from the stadium. More trustworthy. So if you increase the demand curve, we see instead of the quantity demanded decreasing from Q star here to Q prime, it's now increased slightly to Q double prime. So we're seeing less of a negative effect. But we're seeing the price increase even more because the demand curve is shifting off. Various studies of occupational licensing try to measure this. They'll commonly look through one occupation at a time, comparing them across states. We tend to find between 10 and 15% wage premium for professionals that work in licensed occupations. So massage therapists, in states that they have a license, which is now like 44, 45, they earn 16% higher wages, we found, than massage therapists that work in unlicensed states. So because these are services, consumers are bearing that cost. So prices are about 16% higher. Okay, so to end, we'll talk about shifts in a curve versus movements along the curve. If there's an increase in supply, we know that the equilibrium quantity is going to increase and the price is going to decrease. That's the effect of moving the supply curve. So it's easy to think or to get our language messed up and saying that the decrease in price will cause an increase in demand, will cause the demand curve to shift as well. But that's not true. The decrease in price will cause a movement along the demand curve. Remember we talked about this last class, the difference between movements along the curve and moving the curve itself. So the demand curve already describes how much of the good consumers want to buy at any given price. So when the price change occurs, we just look at the demand curve to see what happens, how it moves along there. So to look at this example right here, the demand curve increases, the demand curve shifts out. So we move along the supply curve from here to here. We don't see the supply curve itself shifting, it's just a movement along the curve. Now if something else happens, another variable that affects supply changes, then you'll see the supply curve shift. But that's a second, thing going on, a second variable change. From just the variable change that moves the demand curve is not going to move the supply curve. Do you guys have any questions about that? Any questions from today's class in general? If not, for next class, for Tuesday, your homework assignment is the murkiest point from the week. What was the most difficult part to understand?